Private Eye, 6 decades of jokes and journalism.
Hello and welcome to the 1980s. It's just one of the 6 decades through which Private Eye has been chronicling the life of the nation, doing this through jokes and journalism, scoops and spoofs. And to celebrate the magazine's 60th birthday, we've gathered them all together in a beautifully designed book we're calling Private Eye, the 60 Yearbook. It's been edited by Adam Macqueen, who's here now to tell us absolutely everything that happened between 1980 and 1989 in less than 60 seconds. Go.
Right, so it's basically Mrs. Thatcher. That's what happened in the 1980s. She's elected in May 1979. She stays there throughout the whole of the 1980s. And for the whole of that time, courtesy of the two people who had previously written Mrs. Wilson's diary for Private Eye, Richard Ingrams and John Wells, eye readers are treated to the letters of Mr. Dennis Thatcher to his golfing friend Bill. What's happening behind the scenes at the Eye is mostly attempts to sue the magazine out of business. So spectacular results. You get £600,000 in damages for hurting the feelings of a serial killer's wife. You get £55,000 in exemplary damages for hurting the feelings of a massive crook by saying he was a massive crook. That's, of course, Robert Maxwell. Thousands more to pretty much anyone who just felt like throwing a writ in. It was a real free-for-all. But at the same time, the Eye was managing to kick off stories about scandals that still resonate decades later. So the first report in the Eye on the scandal of haemophiliacs being given blood infected with HIV and hepatitis was in 1987. There's a whole inquiry into that going on even as we speak. Paul Foot's first sceptical piece suggesting the authorities were pursuing the wrong people for the Lockerbie terrorist bombing for reasons of international politics appeared just weeks after the aeroplane was blown up. What else happened? In 1986, this new bloke took over as editor, someone called Ian Hislop.
Well, so unsurprisingly, the Eye went into the new decade full of Thatcherite optimism.
Happy New Year. Who are you trying to kid?
Not the real Maggie there, but Jan Ravens, who joins us today along with Lewis Macleod and Harry Enfield. And as Maggie got stuck into the job, so did her husband Dennis. Let's hear from him as the controversial Moscow Olympics approach in 1980, just after Russia has invaded Afghanistan, and it didn't go so well.
Dear Bill, M is frightfully steamed up about the Russian bear. Quite right, too, in my book. As one who knows his Burma and has seen Johnny Gurkha on the job, I see the whole thing as crystal clear. Peter Carrington, the Foreign Secretary, dropped in the other night with his missus for a bite, and while she and M went off to powder their noses, I took the opportunity of putting my 2 pennyworth in. As I told him, with the help of the very serviceable Reader's Digest World Atlas and Restaurant Guide, your Tunbridge Wells friend kindly slipped into my arms after that shindig at the Pantiles. Warm water ports is the name of the game. Ever since the days of Ivan the Terrible, I explained, over a tincture or twain, what the Rusky has always craved is somewhere to keep his fleet where it isn't too cold. What more natural, then, than for the Red Menace to come rolling through the Khyber, next stop Colombo, and there's your warm water port. Carrington seemed very receptive to my little geography lesson, drumming his fingers on the tabletop and looking at the ceiling. Always a sign, in my experience, that the little grey cells are working flat out. I was emboldened to suggest something short and sharp. No earthly use withdrawing our show-jumping team from the Olympic caper. Only leave the way open for the Japs to nab all the silver pots and trophies. Far better a quick blitz with half a dozen ICBMs. Only language these chaps understand. Witness A. Hitler, failure to deal with menace of. I could see Carrington absorbing all this, eyes tightly closed in concentration. Hope I at least provided him a salutary antidote to what he gets fed by the assorted moles, pinkos and woofters at the FO, before we joined the boss and Lady C for the after-eights.
Dennis did get his way, and there was a war before too long, but in the Falklands rather than against Russia. The Sun came out in full-blooded support.
The Sun says
Michael Foot is hanging too good for him. Kill an Archie and win a Metro.
plus
Is the Pope gay? 10 telltale signs.
Private Eye carried its own dispatches from top journalist Sir Maxwell Hastings VC, who was embedded with the forces in the South Atlantic.
Today I watched with my own eyes as British forces reoccupied the last remaining territory still in Argentine hands. It was dawn as detachments from 14 Para, 12th Gurkhas, 4th Special Patrol Group, and 2nd ITN Camera Battalion massed for a dawn swoop on the tiny but impregnable 12-foot by 12-foot fortress of South Marmite Island. An as yet unnamed number of casualties were sustained as the troops scrambled desperately for room to stand upright on this piece of rock little bigger than a billiard table. And yet later that evening, when room had at least been found on the few square inches of rock to raise a flagpole proudly carrying the Union Jack and a signed photograph of the Princess of Wales, there was a feeling that it had somehow all been worth it. As battle-hardened Staff Sergeant Gary Cab Wallander put it to me with tears in his eyes,
"Excuse me, you're treading on my foot."
Meanwhile, The Nation and the Eye's top columnist Glenda Slag was transfixed by events on imported American soap opera Dallas. Here's her column on Monday.
JR, aren't you sick to death of him? With his 10-gallon hat and his false teeth, he's got to be jerk of the year. Get it? Give us a break, mister. Get back to Dallas and put a sock in it, okay?
Here's her column on Tuesday.
JR, don't you just love him? With his come and get me smile and his long silk dressing gown, he's my idea of a real Texan, if that's not Texan the imagination. Get it? Hi there, cowboy. Here's a gal that's just dying for some of that old-time Southern comfort.
Here's her column on Wednesday.
Who shot JR? Who cares? Not me, mister.
Private Eye is very keen on making up diaries and passing them off as the work of genuine political leaders, but they don't like it when someone else does it. So when Rupert Murdoch purchased the fake Hitler diaries in 1983, he was deeply unimpressed. Here's a reminder of the contents. 26th of August, 1938.
Oh, mein Gott. What am I to do about this unspeakable little man Goebbels? What a vulgar man he is, to be sure, with his club foot and his lies. If he goes on like this, our beloved fatherland may soon be dragged into war.
12th of July, 1940.
Oh, mein Gott. What in Himmel am I going to do with this Schweinhund Göring? With his crazy ideas about dropping bombs on London. The English are a nice bunch of guys with their cricket and their old school tie and the Duke of Finse.
15th of June, 1944.
Oh my God, what a mess this Dummkopf Himmler is landing us into with his mad schemes for invading Russia. If things go on like this, I tell you, it will all end in tears.
21st of July, 1944.
Donner und Blitzen. Mein little bomb plot to blow up all my colleagues is alles aufgegangen. Instead of Goebbels, Göring and co. all being blown into the smithereens, instead it is none other than your old chum who is getting it in the neck, not to mention the arm. Now, how am I going to finish these very important diaries for the Sunday Times?
And speaking of making things up, in 1987, Geoffrey Archer, the Conservative Party's deputy chairman, won a libel case over claims he'd had sex with a prostitute called Monica Coughlin. There were two reasons why Archer won the case. First, that he lied through his teeth and faked the evidence that was prepared for the court, and secondly, that the judge blatantly appeared to have the hots for Archer's wife, Mary. And at this point, we're able to welcome a special guest star from beyond the grave, the Eye's much-missed late proprietor, Peter Cook, who made this recording impersonating Mr. Justice Cockle Caulfield when he was summing up to the jury that Christmas.
Is it likely we have to ask ourselves that a man with such a distinguished record in 2 world wars, furthermore a man who plays squash every day, would wish to seek in the still hours of the morning the dubious solace of cold, joyless, rubber-insulated, double-glazed intercourse in a room no larger than a man's hat, with rats and bats crawling through the wainscoting, gibbering their horrid message of despair unto the nations of Judah. If you think this is possible, then think again, if you will, to the vision which came upon us in this courtroom only 3 days ago, as we gazed in wonder at the miracle which glowed in this witness box. Was she not called Mary, like unto the mother of our Lord? Did we not sense the odor of sanctity, an unearthly fragrance in the courtroom that day, like the spring flowers in the Vale of Hebron, which, as you may remember, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, are particularly gorgeous at this season of the year? Is it even remotely conceivable, I ask you, that such a paragon of womanhood would live with such a creep? Oops, oh dear. Pray strike that from your memory, but not completely. Would anyone who had the good fortune to have wedded and bedded this fairest of the fair, this gorgeous, pouting, whew, what a scorcher. Pray open the window, Mr. Usher. I feel quite overcome. The very thought of being in the same room with her rustling underwear, concealing the full flower of her womanhood, as you may think, ladies and gentlemen of the... Where was I? Yes. We now come to what you might think should be regarded as the core of the case for the defense. So, met Mrs. Cochran, yes, about that. £2,000 at Victoria Station, bit fishy, but why not? Nothing wrong with that. Who doesn't do that? Never mind. It is not within my powers to advise you on the sum of money to be awarded to Mr. Archer, should you so award. But when you do, you must summon into your mind not only the Olympic sprinter and former Prime Minister Mr. Archer himself, but above all, the ethereal, one might almost say angelic figure of his poor, wronged wife. About 500,000, I would say. Finally, brethren, I beseech you to ponder upon these things in your hearts and retire to find Mr. Archer innocent.
This was, of course, Peter's second appearance as a judge for Private Eye. Back in 1979, he'd adapted the Eye's version of the equally biased address to the jury in the Jeremy Thorpe murder case, also featured in the 60 Yearbook in all good bookshops now. And Peter performed this on stage at the Secret Policeman's Ball on behalf of Amnesty International. Seek it out if you can, but not yet, because we're not finished with the 1980s. Fortunately, the Eye had an expert on hand to guide readers through the seismic political changes of the decade in the form of BBC correspondent John Cole.
Undoubtedly, Mrs. Thatcher, Alf Garnett, Molto Adagio Rastafarian, no major changes in cabinet. As predicted, Mr. Talbot, Rambo Adrian Mole, General Buhari replaces John Solomon Gomer as party chairman. Nigella Horatio Moster Cecil Parkinson Hon Detroit Kalamazoo as minimum nudiflorium hopes of comeback dashed. Leg over multifarious Violet Bonham Carter Nelson Mandela bulk besh disappointment. Tinker Taylor Soldier Spy Master Patrick Johnkin Typhoon Eller Duran Duran Lucha de la Robbia, scapegoat for Mrs. Thatcher's Metropolitan Council, ablution innuendo de facto, rumbaba sine qua non, see you later, alligator Lord Young Weetabix.
And if that wasn't clear enough, the Eye's resident polemicist Dave Spart was on hand to clear up any misconceptions people might have had about the end of the Cold War.
Once again, it is totally sickening to read the capitalist media indulging in an orgy of triumphalist self-congratulation on the so-called death of communism, i.e. the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the other alleged reform movements of the Eastern Bloc, i.e. Prague, Warsaw. What the masses are really demanding has been totally and unequivocally obscured and distorted by the delusions of euphoria generated by the broadcasting monopolies of the so-called free world. Viz, the people on the streets are celebrating the return to the real values of Marxist-Leninism, and far from being an end to the socialist struggle, it is, on the contrary, a new victory for the proletariat and for the revolutionary ideals espoused by generations of the International Brotherhood of Workers, and a total and utter defeat for the forces of reactionary bourgeois Thatcherite Gorbachevism.
And that wasn't the only previously unthinkable political upheaval that was on the horizon, because by the start of the 1990s, Mrs. Thatcher herself was on the way out.
Rejoice, rejoice.
Thatcher Memorial Issue.
I'd like you to meet my successor.
We'll be reminding ourselves who he was, oh yes, tomorrow, as we go on into the 1990s. Goodbye.
Private Eye, 6 decades of jokes and journalism. On sale now.